Cheap street rat, the words spat out by President Donald Trump, echoing through the halls of Congress. But this wasn't just another insult. It was the opening shot of a political showdown watched by over 120 million Americans on live television. The kind of confrontation that can define a generation. On one side, Donald Trump, the 47th president, wielding power, arrogance, and the weight of the Oval Office. On the other, Jasmine Crockett, a lone congresswoman, branded with slurs yet armed with truth, fire, and an unshakable will to fight for justice. Every second of this hearing peeled back the mask of corruption, inequality, and raw abuse of power. And what began as an insult would spiral into one of the most explosive political clashes in modern U.S. history. The cameras were already rolling. Across America, living rooms glowed with the broadcasts. CNN, Fox, MSNBC, even local stations carried it live. Over 120 million viewers leaned forward, breath held. The hearing chamber in Washington, D.C. was a crucible, and every eye was locked on the two figures at its center. Donald Trump, the 47th president, sat at the witness table. His trademark smirk lingered on his face, as if the entire proceeding were nothing more than a comedy show staged for his amusement. Opposite him stood Jasmine Crockett. No smirk, no smile, only fire. Her palms pressed firmly against the desk as she leaned forward, eyes piercing through the man who had once controlled the nuclear codes. The first words struck like a hammer. "Mr. President," Jasmine's voice rang out, steady but burning, "you have betrayed the Constitution of the United States." The words cracked the silence. Gasps rippled across the chamber. The crowd shifted uneasily, reporters' pens flying, cameras zooming closer. Trump blinked once, slowly, then leaned back, chuckling under his breath. But Jasmine didn't pause. She drove forward. "You have undermined the rule of law. You have mocked our democracy, and you have turned the highest office in this land into a weapon against its very people." The room vibrated with tension. Some in the gallery clapped. Others booed. Security guards barked for order. The chair of the committee slammed the gavel, but it barely pierced through the rising storm of voices. Jasmine straightened her posture, her eyes never leaving Trump. "You are not just a man who lies. You are a man who has conspired against the freedoms of every American citizen." The weight of her words hung in the air like smoke after a gunshot. Trump tilted his head, smiled wider. And then he leaned into the microphone. "Betrayed the Constitution?" His voice dripped with contempt. "Lady, I am the Constitution. Without me, this country falls apart. And you," he jabbed a finger toward Jasmine, "you're nothing but a cheap street rat trying to bite at a lion." The insult echoed across the chamber, picked up instantly by every microphone, every live feed, every screen in America. The crowd roared again. Some shouted in outrage. Others laughed, clapped, even cheered. Jasmine's jaw tightened. She didn't flinch. But then, Trump moved. He reached into a thick stack of folders beside him, shuffling papers with deliberate slowness. He pulled one out, held it up like a magician unveiling a trick, and placed it on the table for the cameras to see. It was a letter, stamped, signed, bearing Jasmine Crockett's name. At least that's what it looked like. "Here's your warrior of justice," Trump sneered. "Here's your so-called defender of democracy. Read this." A letter from Crockett herself, promising backroom deals with foreign lobbyists, selling out this country while pretending to play the hero. The cameras zoomed. Screens across the nation froze on that single sheet of paper. For a heartbeat, the chamber went dead silent. Then the whispers began. A wave of murmurs rippled through the room, reporters snapping photos, typing frantically. At home, millions of viewers furrowed brows, leaned closer to their televisions, muttered to their spouses, "Could it be true?" Jasmine's eyes widened, not in guilt, but in fury. "That's a forgery," her voice thundered. "A fabrication, a desperate stunt to distract from the crimes you have committed." Trump only laughed, shaking his head like a parent humoring a foolish child. "Forgery? Really? This is signed in your name, dated and delivered. You can scream all you want, Crockett, but America is watching, and they see the truth." The crowd erupted again, half shouting "liar" at Trump, half hurling it at Jasmine. The chair slammed the gavel once more, his voice breaking with strain. "Order! Order in the chamber!" But the damage was already done. The doubt had been planted. Across the nation, millions of minds tilted in hesitation. Could Jasmine be as righteous as she claimed? Or had Trump just pulled off the opening move of a masterful deception? Jasmine gripped the desk, her knuckles white. The rage in her chest burned hotter than ever, but her voice cut through the chaos like a blade. "Mr. President, if you think a sheet of forged paper can silence the truth, you are gravely mistaken. You may have the crowd, you may have the cameras, but you do not have justice, and justice will tear through every lie you spread." Trump leaned back, lips curled in satisfaction. He had drawn first blood, but Jasmine Crockett had no intention of retreating. The hearing had only just begun, and the world, the entire watching world, was about to witness a battle that would scorch history into its bones. Trump leaned forward, knuckles pressing into the desk, his face flushed red under the hot glare of the television lights. He didn't waste a second. His words came like a barrage of arrows, sharpened, poisoned, designed to pierce and humiliate. "This woman," he boomed, his voice cracking across the chamber, "isn't just a liar. She's a traitor to her people, a traitor to her country, a traitor to everything America stands for." The words hung heavy, each one like a stone hurled at Jasmine. Gasps rippled again through the gallery. Reporters exchanged quick glances, hands flying over keyboards. The word traitor was explosive, incendiary. A brand that, if it stuck, could destroy a career, a reputation, even a life. Trump didn't stop. "She talks about justice, but she sold justice to the highest bidder. She talks about freedom, but she kneels to globalists and foreign money. She talks about the Constitution, but she spits on it every single day she sits in Congress." He paused, leaning closer into the microphone. His voice dropped low, almost a growl. "Mark my words, Jasmine Crockett is the enemy within." The chamber convulsed. Some shouted, "Shame!" Others chanted, "Traitor!" The roar rose so loud it seemed to shake the very wood-paneled walls. For a moment, the firestorm threatened to consume everything. But Jasmine did not flinch. Her chest rose once with a steady breath. She placed both hands calmly on the desk, lifted her chin, and when she spoke, her voice cut like tempered steel. "Mr. President, you can throw every insult in the dictionary at me. You can call me a liar, a traitor, a street rat, but the truth is not shaken by your words. It is revealed in them." The crowd stilled slightly, leaning in. Jasmine's tone sharpened. "Because every time you shout, every time you smear, every time you twist your tongue to poison this chamber, you prove what I have been saying, that you fear accountability, you fear justice, and you fear a woman who will not bow to your lies." The applause came swift, like a crack of thunder from half the gallery. Trump slammed his hand against the desk. "Lies, all lies!" But Jasmine's eyes burned with controlled fury. "You accuse me of betrayal? Let us speak of betrayal then. Betrayal is summoning mobs to storm the Capitol. Betrayal is leaning on foreign leaders to dig up dirt on political rivals. Betrayal is placing yourself above the law while Americans die from your negligence." The audience roared again. This time the sound was a battlefield, half cheers, half boos, clashing in midair like steel on steel. Trump's smile faltered, just a fraction, and Jasmine pressed harder. "I swore an oath to the Constitution. You swore the same. The difference is, I have honored mine. You trampled yours beneath your feet." The chamber seemed to freeze on those words. Then, as if on cue, the twist arrived. From the corner of the room, a witness rose, a man in a dark suit, one of the scheduled testimonies for later in the hearing. He had been expected to confirm Jasmine's claims, to deliver damning evidence against Trump. But now he stepped forward, voice trembling as he addressed the chamber. I need to correct my earlier statement." Every head swiveled. Cameras snapped instantly to him. Jasmine's eyes narrowed. The man cleared his throat. His face glistened with sweat. "I had previously said that President Trump pressured me into falsifying documents. His voice cracked. But that may not be entirely accurate. In fact, he hesitated, glancing briefly toward Trump. I believe Representative Crockett might have misled me into exaggerating my account. The chamber detonated. Gasps, shouts, chaos. Jasmine's face froze in disbelief. Trump's smirk exploded into a triumphant grin. He pointed dramatically toward the man, then back at Jasmine. You see? You see, America? Even your so-called witnesses can't stomach her lies. She twisted his words, manipulated his testimony. That's not a warrior of justice. That's a fraud. The gallery thundered, half cheering Trump's declaration, half shouting in shock at the betrayal unfolding live on television. Jasmine felt the ground tilt beneath her. The one voice she had counted on to pierce through Trump's wall of deception had just turned, and he had turned in front of the nation. But she did not collapse. Her voice, though quieter, struck with the sharpness of ice. Look at him, she pointed to the witness. Look at his eyes. Look at the sweat dripping down his brow. That is not the voice of a man telling truth. That is the voice of a man who fears power, who bends beneath its shadow. She turned, her gaze sweeping across the chamber, cutting through the noise. Fear may silence witnesses. Fear may shake the weak. But fear cannot bury the truth. Not today, not ever. The room hushed for a moment, held in the grip of her words. But Trump seized the silence, slamming his fist on the desk. Liar! Traitor! Manipulator! His voice boomed. America deserves better than this fraud parading as a congresswoman. The gavel pounded again, the chair's voice trembling. Order! I demand order. But there was no order. Not in the chamber. Not in the country watching. The war of words had ignited into something greater. A trial not only of two individuals, but of the nation's soul itself. And as Jasmine locked eyes with Trump across the battlefield of microphones and flashing cameras, one truth became clear. This fight was far from over, because outside those gilded doors, another battlefield was already burning. On the Capitol steps, thousands had gathered, banners waving, fists pumping, throats raw with chants. Half the crowd thundered Jasmine's name like a rallying cry. The other half screamed curses, their words laced with venom, their signs branding her as a liar, a traitor, a disgrace. Police lines strained to keep them apart, but anger was a flood, and barricades were paper walls. It started with a shove. One man draped in a flag lunged forward, striking a young protester holding a Justice for Jasmine sign. The retaliation came instantly, fists flying, voices breaking into screams. Within seconds, the crowd convulsed into chaos, bodies colliding like waves in a storm. Batons cracked against shields. Tear gas hissed into the air. Sirens wailed. Blood began to smear across the white marble steps of Congress. Inside, the hearing room buzzed with frantic whispers as aides slipped notes to members of the committee. Jasmine caught sight of one, a scribbled line that read, "Violence escalating outside. Broadcast live." Her heart clenched, because she knew this wasn't just politics anymore. It was war, and the cameras fed it like gasoline. Every network in the nation split screens, one side showing Jasmine and Trump locked in verbal combat, the other side showing chaos on the Capitol lawn. Viewers watched America fracture in real time, their living rooms flooded with fire and fury. The country wasn't just divided, it was bleeding. And then, the twist that few would ever know. At 3:47 p.m., just as chants rose to deafening heights, a low thud rippled through the earth. A boom, sharp and violent, echoed across the Capitol complex. The ground shook. Car alarms screamed. For a heartbeat, the crowd froze, eyes wide, lungs held. Then panic detonated. People surged in every direction, tripping over one another, clawing to escape an invisible threat. Some screamed of bombs. Others swore it was a terrorist attack. But official reports? Silence. Within minutes, news anchors reassured their audiences. Just a disturbance, no confirmed explosion. Footage of chaos was looped, but carefully trimmed, carefully muted. Someone was bearing the truth. Inside, Jasmine's phone buzzed in her pocket. A single encrypted message flashed across the screen from a source she trusted. Explosion confirmed. Suppressed at highest level. Trail leads to Trump operatives. Be careful. Her blood ran cold. She looked up, her gaze locking once more on the man sitting across from her. Trump was leaning back in his chair, lips curled in that familiar, infuriating smirk, as if he knew something no one else dared to say aloud. And in that moment, Jasmine felt it, a shadow stretching long and suffocating over the Capitol, over the nation itself. The hearing continued, words still flying like bullets, but her mind split in two. One half sparred with Trump, countering his barbs, steady as steel. The other half reeled with a single burning question. Had he orchestrated this? Had the chaos outside, the blood, the fists, the panic, been just a prelude? And the bomb, hushed into silence, buried by networks too afraid to dig, was it his message? His way of saying, I control not just the chamber, but the very air America breathes. Hours later, when the hearing recessed, Jasmine slipped into the dimly lit corridors of Congress. Her aides whispered urgent warnings. Don't go alone, the crowd's still hostile. But she needed the silence. She needed space to think. The marble hallway stretched before her, echoing with her footsteps. And there, near a service door, she saw it, a smear of blood. Fresh, not from the chamber, from outside. She bent low, her hand hovering just above it, as if touching would burn her. Because this was no longer just politics. It was blood on the halls of Congress. And Jasmine knew. The violence had crossed the threshold. It had seeped inside, staining not just the floor, but the very soul of the institution. Behind her, a voice echoed down the corridor. Smooth, mocking, unmistakable. Careful, Jasmine. Staring too long at blood has a way of making people think it's yours. Trump. He was standing in the shadows, security at his back, his eyes gleaming like a predator, savoring the chase. She straightened, locking her gaze with his. Her throat tightened, but her voice emerged steady. Was it you, she asked, words sharp, laced with quiet fury. The explosion, the cover-up, the chaos outside. Was it your hand? Trump chuckled, low and dismissive. Explosions? Chaos? Oh, Jasmine. Politics is chaos. Always has been. Always will be. Don't go blaming me because the people can't control their anger. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. Besides, if there was a bomb, wouldn't the news have covered it? The words twisted like a knife. Jasmine felt her pulse hammer in her ears. She wanted to scream, to strike, to tear away the smug veil of denial plastered across his face. But she didn't. She breathed, and she vowed. If the blood on these halls was a warning, then she would heed it. She would uncover the truth, no matter how deep it was buried, no matter how dangerous the path became. Because this fight was no longer about politics. It was survival, and survival demanded sacrifice. The next morning, the chamber filled again. Cameras snapping, lights blazing, America watching with unblinking eyes. But this time, Jasmine was different. She sat taller, her notes sharpened into weapons, her tone cold as steel. Her allies whispered encouragement, but she barely heard them. The blood on the halls still haunted her, and she knew if she didn't strike first, Trump would. The chairwoman called the hearing back to order. Jasmine leaned into the microphone, her voice crisp, deliberate, piercing. Mr. Trump, she began, you swore an oath to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. Do you deny that on January 6th, your words and actions directly fueled an assault on this very Capitol? The room stilled. Trump smirked, shaking his head slowly. There it is, the rehearsed little dagger. His voice dripped with derision. Congresswoman Crockett, you're a lawyer, aren't you? You know how this works. A question framed with poison already contains its answer. Laughter rippled from a few of his supporters behind him, but Jasmine didn't blink. Answer the question, Mr. Trump. Did you or did you not encourage a mob that left police officers beaten, windows shattered, and the halls of Congress desecrated? Trump leaned forward now, his elbows on the table, his grin widening. I encourage patriotism. I encourage freedom. I encouraged America to wake up. If a few people got overexcited, that's hardly my responsibility. Phew, the chamber erupted, half gasping in outrage, half clapping like he delivered a punchline. Jasmine pressed harder. Overexcited? Overexcited is when fans rush a concert stage. What happened here was an insurrection, and you stood at the podium telling them to fight like hell. That is incitement, Mr. Trump. That is betrayal of your oath. For a flicker of a second, the smirk faltered. Trump leaned back, exhaled through his nose, then chuckled low. You sound angry, Jasmine. Maybe too angry. Reminds me of a prosecutor who's run out of evidence. And when prosecutors run out of evidence, he lifted a finger, wagging it. They start screaming louder, hoping no one notices the emptiness of their case. A few reporters scribbled furiously. Jasmine's jaw tightened, but she didn't raise her voice. She lowered it, cold, slicing. So then let's put evidence on the record. Under oath, did you ever pressure state officials to find votes for you? Trump shifted. The camera zoomed. I spoke to people. I asked questions. That's called democracy. Did you threaten them with consequences if they didn't comply? I suggested consequences. Gasps. Reporters' pens scratched harder. Jasmine moved in for the kill. Mr. Trump, threats disguised as suggestions are still threats. You know it. I know it. And America knows it. You can't dance around that forever. The silence that followed was heavy, electric. For the first time, Trump's eyes narrowed. He tapped the table, restless. The smirk was gone. And Jasmine thought, maybe, just maybe, she had cracked the armor. Until he laughed, a booming, mocking laugh that echoed through the chamber, rattling nerves. You're good, Jasmine. I'll give you that. But you're also predictable. You think if you corner me with words, I'll break. He leaned closer to the microphone, lowering his voice until it slithered into every living room in America. But words can be twisted, and sometimes pictures say more than questions ever could. The screens in the chamber flickered, and suddenly there it was, a grainy video, time-stamped, secretly recorded. It showed Jasmine, unmistakably her, seated in a quiet restaurant, leaning in across the table toward a man whose face was half-shadowed. His accent when he spoke was heavy, Russian. The subtitles that followed branded him as what Trump's team had chosen to label him, foreign agent. The chamber gasped. Reporters nearly dropped their pens. Trump folded his arms, his grin reborn, smug and merciless. Ladies and gentlemen, America's brave defender, dining with spies. Cozy, isn't it? The headlines were already writing themselves. Jasmine's breath caught. She knew the meeting. She remembered it. Months ago, a confidential briefing with an international whistleblower who had claimed to hold documents exposing election interference. It was legitimate, legal, but edited like this? Cropped, stripped of context, repackaged with sinister subtitles? It was a trap, and Trump had sprung it in front of the entire nation. The crowd roared, some in outrage, some in triumph. Allies whispered frantically at Jasmine's back. Her pulse thundered. Her throat tightened because she understood what had just happened. In the span of seconds, Trump had flipped the script. She was no longer the accuser. She was the accused. And the court of public opinion was brutal. Trump's voice thundered again, triumphant. You see, Congresswoman, you talk about loyalty, oaths, betrayal. But who's really betraying America here? The woman screaming about my supposed crimes? Or the woman dining with foreign spies in the shadows? He leaned back, basking in the chaos he had unleashed, his smirk once more carved deep. And Jasmine? She forced herself to breathe, to steady her trembling hands, to swallow the fury, the panic, the humiliation. Because she knew if she faltered now, even for a heartbeat, the battle was lost. Her eyes burned as she raised her head again, locking onto Trump's across the storm. This was no longer just about truth or lies. This was survival, and the war had just tilted against her. Within minutes of the video's release, the world outside the chamber convulsed. Clips of Trump's smirk paired with the grainy footage of Jasmine exploded across every news network, every feed, every phone screen, and the hashtags arrived like thunder. Wash justice for Jasmine. Trump forever. Two digital armies clashing across the battlefield of the internet, their rage spilling into streets already smoldering with division. Cable news anchors fumbled to keep up. talking over each other, interrupting experts mid-sentence. Talk radio hosts howled, TikTok churned with edit after edit. Jasmine branded as a traitor in one, a martyr in the next. And the nation's pulse quickened. In New York, protesters wrapped themselves in American flags and chanted Jasmine's name like a war cry. In Texas, caravans of pickup trucks roared down highways, banners screaming Trump 2024 from their beds. In Los Angeles, graffiti bloomed on walls overnight. Crockett, can't truth. In Florida, gun stores reported record sales. The air was thick with fear, anger, and the static of something dangerous pressing against the edges of democracy. And Jasmine watched it unfold in real time. She sat alone in her office, the glow of a dozen screens flickering against her face. Her staff buzzed outside, shouting over phones, arguing with producers, pleading with networks to allow her side of the story. But Jasmine barely heard them. Her eyes were locked on a trending video, a split-screen live stream. On one side, her speech during the hearing, calm, relentless, defiant. On the other, the doctored clip of her alleged spy meeting. The comments scrolled too fast to read. Curses, threats, cheers, prayers. Her name had become a battlefield, and America was burning on it. She closed her eyes, breathing deep, steadying herself. She could take being hated. She could take being mocked. But what was happening now wasn't just about her. It was about what her fight represented. And then, the news broke. A push notification blinked across her screen. Breaking. Armed militia group vows to handle Jasmine Crockett if hearings continue. Her breath froze. She clicked. The video opened on masked men in camo, their faces obscured, rifles cradled in their arms. They stood before a massive Confederate flag and spoke into a shaky phone camera, their voices sharp, chilling. "We're done watching this so-called Congresswoman smear President Trump. She's a traitor, plain and simple. If she keeps running her mouth, we'll deal with her ourselves." Her stomach twisted, not because the threat was unexpected. She had lived with threats for years, but because this was different. This was national, broadcast, brazen, and timed. The militia had tied their ultimatum to the next hearing date. If Jasmine walked back into that chamber, they promised the consequences would follow. Her phone buzzed. Texts from colleagues, from friends, from family. Some begging her to step down, to protect herself. Others urging her to fight harder, to prove she wouldn't be silenced. She stared at the messages, her pulse pounding in her ears. Because deep down she knew, either choice would come at a cost. If she stepped back, Trump would win. His narrative would swallow hers whole. If she pressed forward, the threat hanging over her wasn't just words anymore. It was bullets. Her aide burst in, voice trembling. "Congresswoman, Homeland Security just called. They're upping your detail. They say the chatter online is accelerating." Jasmine nodded numbly, rising to her feet. She paced to the window, looking down at the crowd gathered outside. Protesters and counter-protesters pressed against police barricades, screaming chants into each other's faces. Signs waved like weapons. It looked less like democracy and more like civil war. And she stood at the heart of it. Suddenly her phone lit again. A direct message. Anonymous, no name, just words. "Back down, Jasmine, or you won't make it out alive." Her hands tightened around the phone. Her reflection in the window stared back at her. Tired, shaken, but burning still with something deeper than fear. Resolve. She whispered it aloud, almost to herself, almost like a vow. "I won't back down." Because Jasmine understood something Trump never would. Every threat, every smear, every attempt to silence her only sharpened her edge. And though America was tearing itself apart in hashtags, protests, and armed warnings, though the danger was closer now than it had ever been, she felt the weight of history pressing into her shoulders, and she knew she had to carry it. Outside, sirens wailed. The night glowed with red and blue, and inside, Jasmine Crockett prepared for a hearing that could be her last. She didn't know yet how close the blade was. The morning came heavy, the Capitol drowned in cameras and barricades. The air tasted of tear gas residue, still lingering from the protests the night before. Helicopters hummed above like restless predators circling their prey. Jasmine walked through the marble halls with her head high, the click of her heels echoing like a metronome of defiance. But deep inside, beneath the polished armor, something gnawed. The threats, the mobs, the militia's ultimatum. It was enough to rattle anyone. But that wasn't what unsettled her most. It was the silence. Her team, normally loud, frantic, glued to their phones, had been strangely quiet that morning. Eyes averted, whispers behind doors. Papers shuffled but not explained. And then came the moment. Midway through the hearing, just as Jasmine was pressing Trump on constitutional law, the opposition blindsided her. A thick folder slammed onto the witness table. The chair's gavel cracked like a gunshot. "Congresswoman Crockett," the committee chair's voice boomed. "Can you explain these?" Jasmine froze. Inside the folder were documents, financial ledgers, flight records, encrypted emails, all pointing to her, all claiming that she had been funneling money to foreign groups, meeting with shadowy figures, betraying the very Constitution she claimed to defend. Her throat went dry. "This is false," she said, her voice sharp, steady. "Fabricated." But the whispers spread instantly. Reporters scribbled. Cameras zoomed. The word traitor slithered through the chamber like smoke. And then the knife twisted. The source of the documents was announced. Not Trump, not one of his lackeys, but Marcus Hale, her chief strategist, her closest confidant, the man who had stood beside her since her first campaign, who had written her speeches, fought her battles, promised loyalty thicker than blood. He wasn't in the chamber. He didn't need to be. His betrayal sat there in black ink, screaming louder than any testimony. Jasmine's chest tightened. She couldn't let it show. Not here, not now. "These are lies," she said again, louder this time, "manufactured to distract from the truth we uncovered about Donald Trump." But the committee pounced. Every question turned to her. Every accusation sharpened. They no longer wanted answers from Trump. They wanted blood from Jasmine. The hearing devolved into chaos. Trump leaned back in his chair, smiling, hands folded as if watching a play he himself had directed. The man was silent now, smug in his silence, letting the avalanche bury her. And for the first time, Jasmine felt herself slipping. The ground wasn't steady anymore. The headlines that would roll tonight weren't about Trump's corruption. They'd be about hers, her alleged betrayal, her downfall. When the gavel finally struck adjournment, Jasmine walked out into the night like a soldier retreating from a field drenched in defeat. Her security detail surrounded her, their faces tense, their voices low into radios. But their presence felt hollow, because the real wound wasn't the threat of bullets in the street. It was the knife in her back. Marcus. She replayed every conversation, every late-night strategy session, every moment she had trusted him. When had he turned? Was he bribed, blackmailed, or had he always been waiting for the right moment to twist the blade? Her office was dark when she entered, staff already gone, the silence suffocating. She dropped her bag onto the desk and sat, her body heavy, her chest burning with anger she couldn't yet release. And then, a sound. Her phone buzzed. An anonymous email. No subject line, no sender, just a file attached. Her hands hesitated above the keyboard. For all she knew, it could be another trap, another layer of poison waiting to spread. But something in her gut told her to open it. The screen lit with scanned documents, dozens of them, polling data, internal memos, voting machine audits, names of operatives, transfers of funds. Her heart kicked against her ribs as she scrolled, breath shallow, because these weren't about her, they were about him, Donald Trump. The documents detailed a secret operation, back channels, state-level manipulation, targeted machine tampering. It was a blueprint of electoral sabotage, and it was damning. Jasmine's hands shook as she clicked through page after page. Her pulse raced, her lips parting as if to whisper the truth aloud but finding no sound. At the bottom, one final note, a single line typed in plain font. "He thinks he buried you. Bury him instead." No signature, no clue who had sent it, but the weight of it crushed her, because for the first time since this nightmare began, Jasmine held something more than survival. She held a weapon, the kind of weapon that could pierce Trump's armor, cut through the lies and drag his empire down. She leaned back in her chair, staring at the flickering monitor. Exhaustion clung to her bones. Betrayal still burned in her chest. But under it all, something else sparked alive. Hope. No, not hope. Resolve. Because tomorrow, she knew, the storm wouldn't be just about her. Tomorrow, the battlefield would shift. And if she played it right, it would be Trump standing at the edge of the cliff. Tomorrow had arrived, and the battlefield had shifted. Jasmine Crockett walked into the committee chamber with the air of a soldier stepping into war. Cameras buzzed, pens scratched, the air thick with anticipation. The headlines of betrayal still clung to her name like chains. But tonight, she carried something far heavier than shame. She carried a weapon. The folder was tucked in her briefcase, guarded by her trembling hands. Inside lay the documents, the damning proof that Trump's empire was built not just on bluster, but on manipulation of democracy itself. The gavel struck. This hearing will come to order. Jasmine rose slowly, every eye locked on her. Her voice cut through the silence, firm but edged with fire. Members of the committee, before you question me further on fabricated accusations, I present evidence of a far more urgent crime, evidence that strikes at the heart of our republic. A murmur rippled through the room. Trump leaned forward, eyes narrowing, the smirk he had worn yesterday tightening into something darker. Jasmine placed the folder on the table and slid it across to the clerk. Screens lit up as the documents were projected. Audit reports, encrypted memos, chain of command notes. Every word an arrow, every page a wound. The room grew hot, restless. Reporters leaned forward. Senators whispered furiously. Trump broke the silence first, laughing, a hollow, mocking sound. More lies, he sneered. More theater. You think people are stupid? They won't believe this garbage. But then came the second blow. We have a witness, Jasmine said. Her voice was ice. An individual who can verify these documents. Someone who was in the room when the orders were given. The chamber erupted. Voices collided. Objections rose. The chair's gavel thundered. Order! Order! And then the doors opened. A figure entered. The cameras spun, flashes bursting like lightning. The man was tall, wrapped in a plain coat, his face shadowed by the brim of a hat until he stepped into the light. Gasps spread through the chamber like wildfire. Because the witness was no ordinary citizen. It was Richard Callaway, Trump's former senior advisor, his right-hand man during the campaign, the architect of his messaging, the strategist whispered to have shaped Trump's rise brick by brick. He hadn't been seen in months. Rumors had swirled, exile, payoffs, even death. And now here he was, walking into the chamber like a ghost returned to haunt his maker. Trump's jaw clenched, his knuckles whitened as he gripped the table. Jasmine felt her pulse hammer. She had expected someone, but not him, not Callaway. The man took the stand, his voice low but clear enough to cut through the tension. I was there, he said. Donald Trump personally authorized operations to tamper with election infrastructure in multiple states. These documents, he gestured to the screen, are real. I saw them created. I delivered some myself. The room exploded in chaos. Reporters shouted. Senators rose from their seats, pointing, arguing. Trump pounded the table. Lies! He's a traitor, a bitter nobody looking for a book deal. But the damage was done. The testimony hung heavy in the air, like smoke after a gunshot. Jasmine's heart surged with adrenaline. For the first time, she saw the mask crack on Trump's face. Not the smirk, not the sneer, but something raw, fear. She leaned forward, her voice steady, cutting through the noise. Mr. Callaway, to be absolutely clear, are you saying Donald J. Trump ordered direct interference in the United States election? A silence fell. Cameras zoomed in. Millions at home leaned closer to their screens. Callaway's eyes flickered toward Trump. For a heartbeat, it seemed he might falter. But then, with a slow breath, he answered. Yes. The word detonated like dynamite. Reporters shouted questions. Senators screamed for order. Security surged closer to Trump, who now looked ready to leap across the table. But before the storm could settle, the twist came. The witness was gone. It happened in a blur. One moment Callaway was seated, his hands steady on the microphone. The next he was standing, pushing back his chair, eyes darting to the exit. Security tried to block him, but he slipped through a side door with practiced precision, vanishing into the labyrinth of the Capitol. The committee chamber fell into stunned silence. "Where is he going?" someone shouted. "Why would he leave now?" And then a message appeared, not spoken aloud but delivered minutes later to Jasmine's secure phone, a single encrypted text. 4 words that made her blood run cold. "Who is hunting me?" Her fingers trembled as she read it again. Who was hunting him? If Calloway was on the run, then forces far larger than this committee, larger than Trump, were already moving in the shadows. To silence him, to bury the truth. Jasmine's victory turned to ash in her mouth. She had the testimony, yes. But without the man, without his protection, it was fragile, combustible. Trump, meanwhile, leaned back in his chair again, that smug grin returning, though thinner this time, more desperate. "See," he said, "your star witness ran away. Cowards tell lies and then flee. America sees through this circus." But Jasmine barely heard him. Her mind spun, replaying the testimony, the documents, the text. Somewhere in the Capitol's veins, Richard Calloway was running. Somewhere in the shadows, someone was hunting him. And now Jasmine knew the war wasn't just hers anymore. It was his too. 2 hunted souls bound by the same truth, staring into the same abyss. And the abyss was staring back. The city outside was restless. Helicopters droned above Washington like vultures circling a dying beast, their searchlights sweeping across monuments that suddenly felt less like symbols and more like shadows of a nation tearing itself apart. Inside her apartment, Jasmine Crockett sat in the dark, curtains drawn, phone powered off, breathing shallow. She knew she was being watched. For hours she had sensed it, the faint hum of a parked car's engine across the street, the shadow lingering too long by the lamppost, the subtle shift of movement reflected in the glass. Survival once again. And survival demanded silence. But silence shattered just after midnight. A crash of splintering wood. The front door buckled inward. Heavy boots thundered across the floor. Men, not police, too swift, too brutal. They moved like predators who had studied their prey. Jasmine grabbed the lamp nearest her, swung hard, glass exploding in a man's face. She bolted for the kitchen, heart battering her ribs. A hand caught her jacket, tearing fabric, but she twisted free, diving low. A blade sliced the air where her neck had been. She ran for the back window. A gun clicked. She didn't think. She threw herself sideways. The bullet tore through plaster inches from her skull. The night roared with violence. She smashed through the kitchen window, shards ripping her arm as she tumbled into the alley below. Pain flared white-hot, but adrenaline kept her moving. Behind her, shouts erupted. Flashlights darted across brick walls. She ran. Shoeless, bleeding, lungs screaming, she ran until the sounds faded, until only the pounding of her own heart remained. And when she finally collapsed into the shadows of an abandoned courtyard, gasping, shaking, she realized how close it had been. An inch slower, a second later. She would have been gone. She pressed her torn arm against her chest, blood seeping through her sleeve. Tomorrow she had to face the committee again. But tonight she had just survived an execution attempt. Dawn broke cruel and unforgiving. With her hair hastily tied back and her arm wrapped in a bandage, Jasmine walked into the Capitol. Cameras swarmed like hornets, microphones shoved toward her face. "Congresswoman, what happened to your arm? Were you attacked? Is this connected to your accusations against Trump?" She kept walking, chin high, every step a declaration that she would not be broken. Inside the chamber, the whispers grew louder. Her enemies smirked, allies looked uneasy, and then the screens lit up. Breaking news. A banner scrolled across. Jasmine Crockett under fire. Sources claim she staged her own injury. She froze. The anchor's voices rang out from every phone, every tablet in the room. Unconfirmed reports suggest Crockett may have deliberately harmed herself to gain sympathy ahead of today's hearing. Critics argue this is a desperate stunt, exploiting victimhood to mask weak evidence. The hashtag #WereCut4Clout is already trending. The chamber buzzed with cruel energy. Senators whispered, reporters smirked, and Trump, sitting smugly in his seat, laughed. Pathetic, he said loud enough for the microphones to catch. She'll do anything for attention. Even hurt herself. Sad. Laughter rippled from his supporters. Jasmine's stomach twisted. They had turned her survival into a weapon against her. She wanted to scream, to throw the truth in their faces, that men had stormed her home, that bullets had chased her into the night, that the blood on her arm was not a trick but the price of staying alive. But the cameras were merciless, the narrative already poisoned. She stood there, trembling but unbowed, staring at the sea of faces waiting for her to break. Instead, she steadied her voice. "I am here," she said, her tone sharp as a blade. "Despite threats, despite attacks, despite the lies now spreading about me, you want to know if I staged this injury?" She held up her arm, the bandage stained red. "Ask the men who tried to kill me last night." A hush fell. Cameras zoomed in. Trump's smile faltered for the briefest of moments. But Jasmine saw it. She saw the flicker in his eyes, the knowledge that she had escaped what was meant to silence her. The hearing began. Her enemies circled. Her allies held their breath. And Jasmine, battered but unbroken, leaned forward once more into the storm, because the night had tried to take her, and failed. Now the day belonged to her. Even if the whole world was determined to call her a liar, the chamber had never felt so alive. Every camera in America was trained on the hearing room. The networks called it the confrontation of the century. The viewership ticker was already breaking records. Tens of millions tuned in, numbers climbing by the second. Hashtags flooded every platform. Jari, justice for Jasmine. Trump forever. The showdown. The Capitol itself felt less like a government building and more like the stage of a gladiator arena. And in the center stood Jasmine Crockett, her arm still bandaged, her face pale but unwavering. Across from her, Donald Trump leaned back in his chair with theatrical arrogance, a man who thrived on spectacle, who had built an empire of chaos. He smiled for the cameras, soaking in the attention like sunlight. The moderator gave the signal. The hearing was live. Jasmine struck first. "Mr. Trump," she began, her voice clear, sharp, honed by sleepless nights and the memory of shattered glass in her apartment. "We are here because you stand accused of attempting to overturn the very democracy you swore to protect." Gasps echoed. The words landed like a blade. Trump chuckled. "Here we go again. Another witch hunt. Another crazy leftist with a martyr complex. Look at her, bandaged up, pretending to be some kind of hero. Give me a break." The crowd split instantly, half hissing, half roaring. Twitter lit up. The moderator's mic struggled against the storm of voices. Jasmine didn't flinch. She pressed forward. "Do you deny giving orders to pressure officials into falsifying results? Do you deny the calls, the meetings, the threats? Because we have evidence." Trump slammed a hand on the desk, the sound booming through the microphones. "You have nothing," he barked. "You're a fraud, Jasmine. A liar. A disgrace to this country. Nobody even knew your name until you started attacking me. You're only here because you're desperate for attention." The insult cut the air like acid. Gasps, murmurs. Hashtags spiked again. Trump unleashed. Crockett, the liar. But Jasmine stood taller, letting his fury burn itself out. "You can call me whatever you want," she said evenly, "but you will answer to the people, and you will answer to the truth." Her words echoed in the chamber. For a moment, Trump sneered but said nothing. And then, chaos. Halfway through the heated exchange, the screens behind the committee flickered. At first, everyone thought it was a glitch. Static. A buzz. Then a voice. Crackling. Unmistakable. Trump's voice. The chamber froze. Millions of viewers leaned forward in their living rooms, their offices, their bars. "We can't let them certify it," the recording growled. "You tell them. You tell the generals, the lawyers, whoever it takes. This is our moment. If we lose, it's over. You do whatever is necessary." The words spilled into the silence like poison. Gasps erupted. Phones flew into the air to record the broadcast of the broadcast. Social feeds exploded. Jasmine's heart slammed against her ribs. She hadn't released this. She hadn't even known it existed. Trump's face twisted. For once, the mask of confidence cracked. Fake! He barked instantly, pointing to the speakers. Deepfake audio. AI garbage. Don't believe it. But the voice kept playing. We're not here to debate. We're here to take it. This country belongs to us. Do you understand? Do. Whatever. It takes. The recording ended with a chilling silence. And then, a message flashed across the screen. File provided by Anonymous. The hearing chamber descended into pandemonium. Some shouted for order. Others shouted for Trump's arrest. Supporters screamed about hoaxes, conspiracies, media manipulation. Jasmine stood frozen, her mind racing. Someone had slipped this USB into the system. Someone who wanted the truth out, but not their name. For the first time in the entire saga, she wasn't the one holding the blade. She was just as stunned as the rest. Trump, however, was unraveling. This is rigged, he howled, face red with fury. You people are trying to destroy me. Do you think I don't see it? Do you think I don't know who's behind this? Lying snakes. Liars. He pointed directly at Jasmine. You did this. You planted that tape. You faked my voice. You're nothing but a traitor. The moderator tried to restore order, gavel slamming uselessly. The noise was uncontrollable. Senators shouted over one another. Reporters screamed questions. Security shifted nervously in the aisles. But Jasmine raised her hand, and slowly, impossibly, the room quieted. Her voice cut through the madness like steel. I didn't release that file. I didn't need to, because the truth has a way of breaking free. You can shout fake all you want, Mr. Trump, but America heard your voice. The world heard your voice, and you cannot unspeak what has been spoken. The chamber trembled with tension. Cameras zoomed. Screens captured every twitch of Trump's face. And millions of viewers felt the seismic shift. Something irreversible had just cracked open. The broadcast continued, but it no longer mattered what Trump shouted, no matter how many times he called it fake news. The clip was already viral, spreading across every platform, replayed, dissected, shared. Audio experts chimed in live, claiming initial analysis suggested authenticity. Protests erupted instantly outside the Capitol, one side chanting for Trump's arrest, the other calling it a coup against him. Sirens wailed in the distance. Inside, Jasmine sat silently, letting the storm rage around her. For the first time, she wasn't fighting to prove herself. The evidence had spoken louder than she ever could. But even as hope flickered in her chest, a darker thought gnawed at her. Who had released the file, and why now? Because if they could slip such a recording into a live broadcast, they had power far greater than anyone in that room. Power that could shift the fate of the nation. As the hearing adjourned amid chaos, Trump stormed out, spitting curses, his lawyers swarming like hornets. Jasmine stayed behind, staring at the empty chair where he had sat. The war wasn't over, but for the first time, Trump wasn't untouchable. And for the first time, Jasmine felt the ground shift in her favor. Yet in the silence of that chamber, she whispered to herself, whoever holds that USB, they're playing a game bigger than both of us. The thought chilled her more than any bullet, any smear, any threat she had faced before. Because the storm had only just begun, the chamber had never felt so claustrophobic. The crowd, the cameras, the suffocating heat of millions of eyes glued to the screen. Every second was a noose tightening. Trump was unraveling. You think you've got me? He spat, jabbing a trembling finger across the desk at Jasmine. His face was crimson, sweat slicking his temples, his words foaming with fury. You're nothing. A liar. A fraud. If you think you can destroy me, you're insane. I made this country. Without me, it crumbles. And you, he sneered, his voice breaking into a growl. You're a parasite. A nobody trying to crawl your way to fame on my back. The chamber rippled with gasps. Reporters scribbled furiously. Cameras zoomed, and moderators looked stricken as if history itself had lost its balance. But Trump wasn't done. You think the people are with you? Wrong. They're with me. They'll tear you apart in the streets. Don't think I don't see it. Don't think I won't crush you. Every word was venom, spat not just at Jasmine, but at the heart of democracy itself. Jasmine sat still, steady, a calm eye in the hurricane. She let him roar, let him burn himself raw before the world. And then softly, almost too softly for the microphones at first, "Are you finished?" The room snapped to silence. Trump blinked, momentarily thrown off by her poise, by her unshaken voice. Jasmine rose to her feet. Her hands trembled, not with fear, but with the weight of what she held. A thick folder, sealed, marked with the insignia of the Department of Justice. She laid it on the desk before her, the cameras hungrily zooming in. "For weeks," she said, voice sharpening like a blade, "I have been called a liar, a fraud, a hysteric, and I endured it because I knew this moment was coming." Her eyes locked on Trump's, unwavering. "This," she tapped the folder, "is the final piece. Signed depositions, financial trails, coordinated communications. Every thread of the conspiracy you spun, pulled together, tied into one undeniable knot. Not my words, not rumors. The law's words." The chamber stirred, gasps rolling like thunder. Jasmine's voice grew, gaining fire, commanding the room. "You can insult me. You can threaten me. You can scream until your voice breaks. But this," she raised the folder high, "this is what will strip you bare before the nation. This is what will end the myth, end the lies, and you." For a heartbeat, the hearing was electric silence. Then the chamber erupted. Cheers from some, outrage from others. Reporters shouted over one another, trying to capture the moment for history. Senators pounded their desks. Hashtags detonated across the digital sphere. Crockett unmasks. Trump, Justice Files, the fall. Trump's face contorted. Panic flickered through the cracks of his rage. "Fake!" he screamed, voice raw. "Those papers are fake! She made them up! This is treason! You hear me? Treason! And you—" He jabbed at Jasmine, spit flying. "You're finished! You'll regret this for the rest of your life." Jasmine didn't blink. "Maybe," she said, voice low, steely, "but at least the world will know the truth before it's over." The room was on the edge of combustion, a tinderbox of fury, triumph, disbelief. And then, a sound that cut deeper than words. A crack. Sharp, violent, final. A gunshot. The chamber froze. Screams erupted as the echo ricocheted off the marble walls. Senators dove for cover. Reporters shrieked. Security shouted. Jasmine felt the air rip past her cheek. Hot, cruel, a whisper of death. The bullet slammed into the wooden panel behind her, splintering it into shards. She staggered, stunned, heart hammering. For an instant she thought she'd been hit. Her hand flew to her chest, her neck. No blood. Not hers. Chaos swallowed the chamber. Security swarmed, guns drawn, shouts clashing in the frenzy. People pushed, shoved, trampled. The smell of gunpowder clung to the air. And in the madness, Jasmine's eyes caught him. A man, near the back of the room, face shadowed under a cap, arms still trembling from recoil. His lips curved into something between a grimace and a smile. And then, like smoke, he vanished into the stampede. "Shoot her! Shoot her!" voices screamed. Jasmine was yanked down by an aide, thrown under the desk as more shouts rang out. Her ears rang, her breath shallow, adrenaline burning through her veins. But one thought sliced through the haze, sharp as the gunshot itself. That bullet had her name on it. She wasn't imagining threats anymore. She wasn't just fighting lies on screens. Someone out there wanted her erased, and they had just stepped out of the shadows to prove it. Minutes felt like years. The shooter was gone. Security locked the building down. Reporters screamed into their cameras. The nation spiraled into hysteria live. Trump sat frozen, pale, lips pressed tight, his rage muted into something colder. Fear, perhaps, or calculation. Jasmine rose slowly from behind the desk, her body trembling, but her voice unbroken. She turned to the cameras, to the millions still watching, hearts pounding in their living rooms. "You just saw it," she said hoarsely, bandaged arms shaking, eyes ablaze. You just saw how far they're willing to go to silence the truth. But I am still here. I am not afraid, and I will not stop." The chamber roared, not just with fear or chaos, but with something deeper. History was happening, and blood was in the air. And Jasmine Crockett had just stepped into legend. The shot that had missed Jasmine Crockett by inches did not stop in that chamber. It reverberated outward, ripping through television screens, phones, radios, tearing across America like a wound. The country erupted. By dawn, barricades sprouted like weeds around the Capitol. Armored vehicles rolled onto Constitution Avenue. Soldiers in camouflage patrolled the marble steps, rifles slung tight, eyes scanning for ghosts. Helicopters circled overhead, their blades chopping the air into a rhythm of dread. Washington looked less like the beating heart of democracy and more like a war zone under siege. The networks replayed the footage in a sickening loop. Jasmine's defiant face, the deafening crack, splinters exploding behind her, the chaos that followed. Anchors whispered in grave tones. Analysts debated whether the republic itself could hold. On social media, the nation split clean in two. Go stand with Jasmine, go to EU1, Trump or chaos. Each hashtag a battle flag. Each post another shove toward the abyss. In New York, protesters flooded Times Square, chanting Jasmine's name, waving homemade signs that read, "Truth will not be silenced." In Dallas, a counter-rally chanted back, "Trump forever," until fists turned into stones and the streets became battlegrounds. The FBI released a grainy photo of the alleged shooter. No name, no capture, just a phantom who had already set the country ablaze. And in the midst of it all, Jasmine sat in a safe house, her bandaged arm throbbing, her reflection in the mirror almost unrecognizable. Her phone buzzed endlessly, messages from allies, threats from strangers, pleas from family. But the one that stopped her breath came from an anonymous number. "They failed once. They won't fail again." Her hands shook as she put the phone down. The walls felt too thin, the air too heavy, the silence too dangerous. But then came the real explosion. That evening, the Washington Sentinel published a leak that tore through the already panicked nation like dynamite. An unnamed senior official claimed Trump was preparing to invoke the Insurrection Act, declaring a national state of emergency. The leak alleged meetings had already been held, drafts of executive orders written, military commanders pressured to pledge loyalty. If true, it meant Trump was ready to wield the armed forces not to protect democracy, but to smother it. The news hit Jasmine like a physical blow. She had thought the bullet was the climax, the attempt on her life, the raw proof that the fight had turned lethal. But no, that had only been the warning shot. This was the coup. The country convulsed overnight. Cable networks ran split screens, Jasmine's bloodied sleeve beside footage of tanks rolling toward D.C. Analysts shouted over one another. Senators scrambled into emergency sessions. Governors threatened to defy federal orders if troops were deployed. The Pentagon released a carefully worded statement, neither confirming nor denying the rumors. But the silence was louder than words. Jasmine watched it unfold from the safe house, her chest aching with every headline. She thought of the faces in the chamber when the gunshot rang out, how fear had stripped them bare, how fragile it all had suddenly seemed. Now that fragility was shattering in real time. Her aide burst into the room, laptop clutched in his hands. "You need to see this." He played a clip leaked from inside the White House. Trump's voice, unmistakable, brash, and venomous, filled the room. "If they think they can take me down, they're fools. I'll burn this country to the ground before I let them steal it. Tomorrow we show them who's in charge. Tomorrow the flag belongs to me." Jasmine's stomach turned to stone. It wasn't just rumor anymore. It was happening. And the world was about to watch America descend into something darker than protest, darker than politics. War. By midnight, the streets of Washington swelled with bodies. Tens of thousands, chanting, screaming, waving flags of loyalty or rebellion. Floodlights turned night into harsh day as barricades groaned under the weight of anger. From her window, Jasmine saw them, the people she had sworn to fight for, the people now being driven into the teeth of history. She whispered to herself, voice trembling, "This isn't survival anymore. This is the reckoning." Her phone buzzed again. a senator she trusted. Urgent. Jasmine, you need to be ready. If he signs it, the Constitution won't protect us. You may be the only one left who can stop him. She closed her eyes, every muscle in her body screaming for rest, but her soul refusing, because she knew the truth. Tomorrow wouldn't just decide her fate, it would decide the fate of America itself. And for the first time in her life, Jasmine Crockett wasn't afraid of dying. She was afraid of what would live on if she failed. The dawn came blood red, staining the horizon like an omen. The barricades rattled with the chants of thousands. Soldiers stood tense, fingers brushing triggers. Inside the White House, Trump prepared to speak, and the world held its breath, because America was trembling, and no one knew whether it would stand or shatter. The chamber was a battlefield long before Jasmine Crockett stepped inside. Cameras blinked like restless eyes. Journalists swarmed the aisles. Senators whispered in panicked knots, their voices low but frantic, as if speaking too loudly might tip the republic over the edge. And then, the doors opened. Gasps rippled through the hall. Jasmine entered. Her face was swollen, bruises blooming across her jaw like storm clouds. A thin line of bandage wrapped tight around her temple. She moved slowly, each step betraying the toll of the last few days. But her eyes, those unyielding eyes, cut through the room with fire. Not fear, not surrender, defiance. The hall quieted, as though even the walls leaned in. She placed a folder thick with documents onto the table before her, and when she spoke, her voice carried the rawness of exhaustion wrapped in steel. I swore an oath to the Constitution of the United States. I did not swear it to fear, or to power, or to a man who believes himself above the law. I will not stop until Donald J. Trump answers for what he has done, even if it costs me my life. The words cracked through the chamber like thunder. Some erupted into applause. Others jeered, pounding fists on desks, shouting her down. The room convulsed with rage, hope, terror, every emotion colliding at once. And outside, the streets mirrored the chaos. Hundreds of thousands had flooded Washington, banners waving like burning torches in the wind. Justice for Jasmine, one chant thundered. Trump forever, another answered. Sirens wailed endlessly as police lines strained under the weight of history. America was on fire. Then the door swung open again. He arrived. Trump strode into the chamber with the swagger of a man who refused to believe the ground beneath him was cracking. His suit was immaculate, his tie blood red, his grin sharp enough to cut. He didn't wait for ceremony. You want a trial? You want to pretend this circus means anything? He sneered, his voice booming over the microphones. Let me save you the trouble. You think you've seen everything? You think this country can live without me? He reached into his jacket and pulled out a slim folder, holding it high like a weapon. The room froze. Trump slammed it onto the table, paper scattering like shrapnel. Here's my ace, my deal, my insurance policy. His voice dropped into a growl. While you idiots bicker, I've already secured what matters, a pact, with powers that make your votes, your laws, your hearings, worthless. He leaned forward, eyes glinting with something feral. If I fall, America falls with me, and the world burns. Screens around the chamber lit up with documents projected for all to see. Sealed memos, coded agreements, whispers of covert exchanges with a foreign superpower. Gas pipelines, weapons transfers. Shadow alliances poised to ignite global conflict. The chamber erupted into pandemonium. Some senators shouted for immediate arrest. Others accused Jasmine of staging the leak. The air turned molten, voices crashing like waves, threats of impeachment drowned out by accusations of treason. And Jasmine, still standing, still burning, felt the weight of the world tilt. It wasn't just about America anymore. If Trump's claim was true, this was a fuse dangling over the entire globe. Her hand brushed the folder she had carried in, the final weapon she had left. Pages of testimony, financial trails, sworn affidavits that tied Trump's every move to an orchestrated scheme of power and betrayal. Evidence that could, if the nation still had the strength, bring him to justice. But it felt so small compared to what he had just unleashed. She looked around the chamber. at the senators ducking their heads in fear, at the cameras capturing every second for a nation splitting at the seams, at Trump, grinning like the devil himself. Her voice rang out, slicing through the cacophony. You can hide behind your threats. You can wave your secrets like a shield. But you cannot bury the truth. You cannot bury justice. Not while I still breathe. She lifted the folder high, her arm trembling but unbroken. The lights above caught it, casting a sharp glow across her bruised face. For a moment silence fell. The image burned itself into history. Jasmine Crockett, battered but unbowed, standing against a storm that threatened not just her nation, but the world itself. Trump snarled, pointing a finger at her like a gun. You don't know what you started. You'll wish that bullet had found you. Jasmine met his glare, her voice steady, final, eternal. No, Mr. Trump, the only thing I wish is that you finally face the justice you've run from your entire life. The chamber exploded once more. Shouts, screams, the roar of chaos. But Jasmine no longer heard it. All she heard was the pounding of her own heart and the whisper of history rushing to meet her. Outside, the streets surged with fury. The crowd had seen it all. Trump's threat, Jasmine's vow, the revelation of a secret that could spark world war. Some shouted for revolution, others for loyalty. The barricades groaned, and above it all, the flags of a divided nation whipped in the storm. Back inside, Jasmine raised the folder higher, her silhouette haloed by the chamber lights, her lips curled into the faintest, fiercest of smiles. This fight, she whispered, every syllable soaked in fire, is only beginning. The cameras caught it, the world saw it, and as the chamber dissolved into chaos once more, as Trump's threats hung like smoke, as rumors of foreign pacts rippled across continents, Jasmine Crockett stood unshaken, a lone flame in the darkness, and from that flame, a fire was waiting to spread. In the end, the story of Jasmine was never just about one woman against one man. It was about the courage to speak when silence was easier, to stand when the world begged you to kneel, and to carry the weight of truth even when it threatened to break you. Power may twist, corrupt, and terrify, but justice, born from ordinary hearts that refuse to surrender, burns longer than any empire. And perhaps that is the lesson, that each of us carries a spark, and when we dare to let it shine, we become the fire that keeps the world from falling into darkness. If Jasmine's fight lit something inside you, don't just move on. Pause, share it, talk about it. Send it to someone who still believes that truth is worth the risk, and that courage belongs to all of us. Follow Harrison's stories, where the shadows are exposed and every silence is broken. Turn on the bell, because the next chapter won't be safe. It will be raw, and it may change the way you see power, justice, and survival. This story is a fictional dramatization, inspired by real struggles, real corruption, and real resilience. Any resemblance to actual people or events is coincidental, or a mirror held up for reflection. Thank you for watching. Justice isn't given, it's fought for. This is Harrison Stories.